Ephesians chapter 6. Now we're going into the last section of Ephesians. Remember, it started seated with Christ in heavenly places. And the first three chapters really is a reminder of our relationship with the Lord. Our time being spent at his feet. And then chapters 4, 5, and the first part of chapter 6 is talking about our walk as believers. Now we're going to talk about standing in the Lord. So it started off as sitting, then it was walking, now it's standing. It could also be categorized as the first three chapters is the wealth of the believer. Chapter 4, 5, and the first part of chapter 6 is the walk of the believer. And now we're entering into the warfare of the believer. Last section. Finally, my brethren, verse 10. Be strong in the Lord and in the power of his might. Be strong in the Lord. Note that he's not just saying be strong. Many times that's what we say to people. He's saying be strong in the Lord. There's people that say, I'm not weak. You know, they're believers, they're Christians, but they say, I refuse to let this happen, or I'm strong. And they keep saying me, I'm strong, I'm this, and I refuse. And they're looking really to themselves. They have the right mindset that they want victory over this particular thing, but they have the wrong solution. They're looking at themselves. That's why Paul says, let every man that thinks he stands take heed lest he falls. Many of us are weak in ourselves, but our strength comes from the Lord. Paul declared in 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 8 through 10, he declared that he would glory in his weaknesses, that the power of God might be revealed in him. For when he was weak, he said, then he was strong. He also said about that confidence of the flesh, he has no confidence in the flesh. You are in your most vulnerable state when you think that you are strong enough to handle the temptation or the situation without the help of the Lord. The classic example, Peter said to the Lord, I will never deny you. And when Jesus responded, before the cock crows, Peter, you will deny me 3 times. Peter answered, if they would slay me, I would not deny you. And the sad thing is I think that Peter really believed that when he said it. I'll never deny you. But what happened? We know the story all too well. Peter, in the area where he felt so strong in himself, failed miserably. And if you're constantly looking at yourself for your strength, it's just going to cause frustration. It's going to cause discouragement. And you're going to feel like, there's been times where I did that, and I felt like I let the Lord down until I heard the Lord say, you never held me up. How could you let me down? I hold you up. He holds you up. It's his power. Be strong in the Lord and in the power of his might. What's the power of his might? Jeremiah 32, verse 27, behold, I am the Lord God, the God of all flesh. Is there anything too hard for me? That's the power of his might. Genesis 18, verse 14, is anything too hard for the Lord? At the appointed time, I will return to you according to the time of life, and Sarah shall have a son. He was reminding Sarah and Abraham, nothing's too hard for him. Going on in verse 11, put on the armor of God, that you may be able to stand against the wiles of the devil. All these attacks that the devil is going to throw at you. You put on the armor of God. You be ready. You see, life isn't all just, it's not a walk in the park. It's not just no problems at all once you come to the Lord. No, you enter into a battlefield, and the enemy is just looking whom he may devour, like a roaring lion, seeking who he may devour. And you're in a battlefield whether you like it or not. Verse 12, for we do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this age, against spiritual hosts of wickedness in heavenly places. So we don't wrestle against flesh and blood. And that's the thing to remember. You got to first realize that you are in a spiritual battle. And the person that you're angry at or feel resentment or you feel that are attacking you, it's not really that person. It's the enemy using that person. Oftentimes, Satan will use his tactics to hide behind people or other physical things to make us believe that we're battling against flesh and blood. But Paul had to remind them that we're not battling against flesh and blood. It's a spiritual battle. But Satan wants to draw us into a physical battle with him, because if he can draw us into the flesh, he has a decided advantage over you. But if we fight against him in the spirit, with the spiritual resources and armor that God provides, we can't lose. So it's vital that we understand the spiritual nature of all our conflicts. So as we continue on in this section of the armor of God, he says, verse 13, therefore take up the whole armor of God, that you may be able to withstand in the evil day, and having done all, to stand. Paul is now going to tell them of the spiritual battle that we're in, but before he even comes into the battle, before he goes into the armor of God and what the particular items of the armor of God, he first shows us our victory, and it is in the Lord and in the power of his might. So we have the victory before we even engage in the fight.